Hello, this is Father Enoch. Sorry for being late. Father Joseph is still supposed to be arriving. And let us see what questions we have. Bait Lord says, what supports praying to Mary and the saints? Is it justified by any Bible verse? Well, in the book of James, we have the verse, the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. That is James 5:16. We also have the text in the book of Apocalypse where it talks about the prayers of the saints who are under the altar. So, what was Orthodoxy like under Islam? Did they treat Orthodox better than Papist rulers? I guess under the Ottomans, it was probably better to be Orthodox. Well, the Orthodox also lived under the Polish, and there was a lot of persecution. That's kind of how the Unia started. But as I recall, Greece was never there was never any, even under the Muslims, Greece never really became Islamic. So ultimately, paradoxically, Orthodoxy fared better under Islam than it did under Papism, because oftentimes under Papism, they would forcibly try to convert the Orthodox. Okay. Nigel says, why follow tradition as well as the Bible? Are there any verses that talk about following tradition? Yeah, what, Second Thessalonians 2:15? So, says, therefore, brethren, follow traditions which I've handed to you. Yes. So, 2 Thessalonians 2:15 states, therefore, brethren, stand fast and hold the traditions which you have been taught, whether by word or our epistle. So that's an example of a Bible verse. Well, you follow tradition as well because you have to know, for example, what books to put in the Bible. The Bible itself doesn't come already equipped telling you what books, for example, what book of the Bible says the book of Matthew should be in the Bible, the Gospel of Matthew. What book of the Bible says the the Epistle to the Hebrews. In fact, why do we say the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John? Where, a lot of that derives from tradition. I mean, I think you could argue, you could determine the Gospel of John, that it was John who wrote that if you compare it with the other Gospels. But you have to follow tradition or an exterior authority of the church's teaching in order to determine what books to even have in the Bible. So they're not contrary forces. They're just simply two supporting. They support each other. And we don't. Let me see if there are any other questions. Ox Templar, your church canonical? Sure, of course. Bait Lord says, based on the prophecies of the saints, do you think the end is near? Probably because of the fall of the Tsar and mass apostasy of the mainline churches, mainline patriarchates. They're fallen to heresy, I'd say probably. But then again, we could always be interpreting it wrongly, and we don't ever, though. We don't want to say. I don't think we're going to go in for another 1,000 years. I don't think that's going to happen. So even if it's not the next 30 years, it seems much shorter time. Were the Crusades justified? It's a complicated question. the general, I can't give a quick answer. All I can simply say is that the general retaliation, military retaliations like the Reconquista in Spain was certainly justified. But the everything that happened in the Crusades was not justified. I mean, like the Fourth Crusade wasn't justified. The first Crusade was actually, I don't think, was a very good idea. But I think the idea of fighting against the Islamic powers was good. I mean, some of it, how it was done, may have not always been a wise choice. Okay, so could you elaborate on the verses that support praying the saints? All right, hold on. So, in the book of Psalms, it says, "Praise the Lord." What is it? There's actually, that I brought this up before. It says, "Bless the Lord, O ye his angels. Bless the Lord, O ye his hosts." So that's Psalm 102, I think. 103. So you're actually addressing the angels. And if you look in the book of Revelation, it says, let's see, and when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. So obviously the saints in heaven pray. You'd have to argue somehow the saints in heaven don't know what's going on earth. There's a concept of the communion of saints. Okay. I think we've done 5 reasons why Protestantism is false. I mean, we've done that twice before. I have no idea, Nigel. I mean, what country you should move to. I don't think it's going to really matter. I mean, if you want to do something like that, I'd probably just move out into the country somewhere. Like, if you're that concerned. All right. Well, we don't really have any more questions, so I'm basically going to. No, I don't know much. I don't. This. I being given by Russia to Greece, despite Greece not deserving it. No, I don't believe this Elder Paisius is a saint. A lot of the prophecies, for example, there's a claim that he gave this general was going to take over Constantinople. That never happened. Although some people could say that that was kind of not really a true prophecy. Well, since I don't really have any co-host here at the moment, I'm basically going to close down and just simply wait till Father Joseph shows up again, because I don't really do well monologuing these things. All right.
Okay, so we're live. I'm back. It's Deacon Joseph. I just got back from doing a quick drive, and I've moved to the top floor in the house, so stairs. Anyway, okay. I am not sure what's going on here. I would assume that Father Enoch told me he was leaving the chat for a bit. And so I guess he's in the chat room. I guess he's there typing. And anyway, so let's see here. Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, okay.
All right.
So what I miss?
Just some questions. For example, one question was, what supports praying to Mary and the saints? Is it justified by any Bible verse? And I gave basically the context of the book of Revelation, like Revelation 5:18, where it says, when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. I also think I talked about Psalm either 102, I think 102, 103, where it says, bless the Lord, O ye his angels. Also, I think in the large Psalms, the last 3 Psalms of the Psalter, it says, praise ye the Lord, O ye his angels. So that's a direct address. And I gave this link here. I'll put in the links to an article in Orthodox Info Center, which has information, like some information about prayer to the saints. So what do you have to say about the Bible and prayer to the saints, Father Joseph?
Well, I think that in terms of the Bible and prayer to the saints, I think the Bible kind of automatically assumes them. And what I mean by that is that both the Old and New Testament church didn't understand in the Old Testament, they understood death as a wall between the souls of the dead and the living, whereas in the New Testament church, the wall is sort of broken down through the resurrection. I don't think that these concepts you can really find them in Protestantism. So when they ask the question, like, why do you pray to Mary and the saints? The idea that Mary and the saints are anything but dead is lost on them. So you have to kind of understand the concept that the soul is alive, that the person is alive, even after their physical death.
So there's no communion of the saints really in the Protestant idea.
No, because they're the communion. It's only for the living, and once you're dead, for all practical purposes, you're nothing. And that's not a very. It's certainly not traditional. It's certainly not within the context of the church. And I think if you read the Bible in that sense, you're probably reading it wrong.
Yeah, and I think someone pointed out that if you look in the Old Testament temple, that one of the reasons you only had depictions of angels as part of their iconography was that only angels dwelt in the heavenly kingdom. But that if you look at the early church, the church iconography became of different saints with the angels. And one of the arguments has been that that's because when Christ did the harrowing of hell, and then he ascended up then he went up to heaven, the saints at that point were able to enter heaven. So, anyway. Okay, so what did you want to talk about tonight, Father Joseph? What was our theme?
No, I mean, it relates to our last show, and so basically, somebody asked a ridiculous question, which I'm going to be honest with y'all. I love your questions, but when I see things like, I didn't think that it was justified in answer about,
I'm sorry, and I was trying to answer everybody. Sorry.
Right, and sometimes, and I respect that, Father, but sometimes people ask questions that are of a flippant nature, and this led to something much darker taking a turn. And what I'm referring to is somebody mentioning bringing their cat to Orthodoxy. And don't worry, Mount Athos Fire Service, we're going to get to your question. But this is going to be the main topic for tonight, at least I think. Basically, basically what Father Enoch answered, he corrected his error. It was a very small one in the question of whether animals have souls. They certainly don't have human souls. So they don't have souls in the sense that we would normally think about our souls, or in the sense of salvation or anything of the sort. They have souls in that they're animate objects, but they don't have souls in the sense. They're not human souls.
They're not immortal souls made in the image of God.
Right.
Which is what we generally think of when we say the word soul.
Exactly. But in any case, this Craig Crawford fellow, Kiprian 700, I'm gonna call him out because he calls himself Craig and so on and so forth. And so I'm gonna put it in quotes. You can't see my fingers doing little quotes, but it's also an Archimandrite Nelos, supposedly, of a group referred to as the followers of Metropolitan Kyriakos of Mesogaea, which, if you know your Greek, means Middle Earth. So he is the Metropolitan of the Hobbits.
Wait. Mesogaea is that's literally a real place in Greece, correct?
Well, yeah, but it's funny that it's Middle Earth. It's just the little hobbits and stuff, but that's beside the point. The point I'm trying to make is the Kyriakos of Mesogaea is a breakoff of a group called the Matthewites. But in any case, a lot of the little tiny breakoffs that are declare themselves the only true church on Earth usually end up declaring that everyone else has to be baptized by them and received by them. Anyway, so Father Enoch made an honest mistake about cats with human souls and said cats don't have souls, and he jumped in. And I'm just going to read the comment from last week because it was just great. It says, go quote St. Basil, of course, having a live question and answer program where one presumes to pontificate on any and all questions leads to a swelling of pride and obvious errors will result. Many questions require careful prayer, contemplation, and research, and should not be merely answered off the top of the head. I do not believe Hieromonk Enoch and Deacon Joseph are properly qualified to conduct the live apologetics show. Well, here's what we
got to close everything down then, right, Father?
Well, here's what I have to say to that, okay? One of the things that I hate about these guys, and I call them false extremists because they're not real extremists. What they are is they're cultists. They're basically people who are going to say to the effect of, if you do not believe like me, regardless of whether or not I'm logically right or wrong, you are outside the church. So it doesn't matter if somebody asks me, say, what's 256 divided by 4? And I say 64. That's not an occasion of pride. That's simply a yes or no answer. It's an answer to a question. It can be right. It can be wrong. Assuming pride because someone wants to answer a question is a sin. But these guys do it all the time because what they're hoping is that they'll catch someone in their humility who's like, maybe I didn't answer the question great as best I could, etc. And they want to break them down. That's their whole purpose. Groups like this, like the Kyriakites, like Gregory of Colorado's group, who will baptize even baptized Orthodox Christians. These folks, in general, call themselves true Orthodox. They have virtually no following. And effectively, the real reason that this was said, because this guy was talking about the Kyriakites for a while. He went on our NFTU page and was like, why don't you talk on your show about the Kyriakites? We're going to talk on the show about the Kyriakites. They're a tiny little sect that happens to exist in a tiny little corner of Greece with like 200 followers. Then they have like 6 bishops that they claim it's 1 bishop per continent, and they own the entire earth. All this because their claim to true Orthodoxy is that they fast 7 days before the communion unless you happen to be clergy, in which case you're magically pure enough to receive. The point is that these kinds of crazy groups have existed since the dawn of the church. Tertullian joined one similar to it. So on and so forth. Eventually what happens is they splinter off into some sort of heresy. Happens all the time. What I don't like is people attacking, my co-host and my friend here, because of the fact that he's jealous that, quite frankly, Father Enoch has a lot of people who, you guys are big fans of his and talk about it and ask a lot of questions, and it's jealousy. People slam on my name all the time. Go ahead and Google my name, and you'll see that I'm one of the most hated Orthodox people on the internet. I'm cool with that, but don't slam on a guy who's just trying to be helpful. It's like these crumb snatchers. They come on and they try to basically try to insult, true Orthodox into joining their sect. And if it doesn't work, they're going to try to break, people's mindsets. What's this?
Well, I guess the lesson is not to answer stupid questions, but also not to reply to stupid.
Oh, no, I love this one, though, because Jay Dyer is one of my favorite people, Snicker. And someone wrote, Jay Dyer said to watch out for some true Orthodox churches because they're backed by the CIA. Thoughts? Just because of the fact that they're not openly backed by the communists and they don't have a big YouTube channel doesn't mean that they're CIA. I don't know of any groups that might be at the most possibly the closest one I could think to would be Metropolitan Agafongo, even though a lot of people would argue exactly the opposite.
Although the problem is that you have things coming out of Etna where they've made statements like supposedly, connection with U.S. intelligence service or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, Archbishop Chrysostomus was like some sort of weird Fulbright type scholar or something. And the point is, we tend to see those people as like world controllers and things like that. The question is, how much influence does Etna really have anymore? I mean,
they were kind of pushed out. There was a battle. Remember when they joined with the
Kiyosites? Yeah, when they joined with the Kalinikos group, then they were.
But they're still trying to have influence because they have kind of conferences where they talk about. They have people invited who are also Fulbright scholars. So there's some sort of battle even happening there.
Yeah, and they can go ahead and do that. And I don't think that they're going to really affect the soul of Orthodoxy because they never really did to begin with. But I'm not going to legitimize Jay's answer because if you, on the one hand, if you say, watch out for some true Orthodox churches because they're backed by the CIA, how about the Moscow Patriarchate? Most of those bishops were active members of the KGB. Is that okay? I mean, the point is, I think that, Jay's a new convert. Frankly, he spends...
Technically, someone told me he's not even been received into any group yet.
I'm going to assume the best and assume he's a new convert. The point is, if he wants to do apologetics, he needs to read a lot more of the fathers, and he needs to shut up about the history of true Orthodox churches he doesn't know, and not base it off the opinions of idiots on Twitter. I know a lot of these people. I've met people, like you read about Metropolitan Valentine, I confess to him. The point is, I know a lot of these people. Some of them might have been, I question whether they were FSB or they were CIA, so on and so on. Some of them, yeah, that's a legitimate question. But if you're new to the whole thing, read some books, man. Don't just say stuff like that, honestly. And stay away from crazy people who claim to be bishops of all the earth and stuff like that. Just no. So now we can get to some more questions. And let's take a look here. We'll go in order. What should I say to Protestants to refute them? What are the best 3 arguments? Father, you want to jump on that one?
I think they said the best 5 arguments. Did they say best 3?
No, it says 3. It says 3.
Hold on, I'm looking. Hold on, are we looking at the very top, right?
Oh, no, I'm towards the bottom.
Oh, okay, hold on. We may have been repeating questions.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, what should I say? Okay, I see. Well, one, sola scriptura is ridiculous, right? I mean, well, that's kind of a negative argument. I think it should be, what's the history? How did the Bible come about? All right? How do you explain the Bible, the arrival of the canon of the Scripture, through the mechanism of sola scriptura? That seems to be impossible. That's one argument.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I think that's a major one. I think that, and this is something I was thinking of when I was talking about in the Fathers. I was thinking of all these solas that, Protestants have, the sola fide, sola scriptura, so on and so forth. And I realized that what you find in the thinking of the Church Fathers is that they're really kind of sola ecclesia. And that's something that is lost on Protestants, that they really don't see the scriptures. They don't, they don't, it's not like, they don't have these five solas. It's based upon really membership and being part of the church and being, in the church. That is the mark of Christianity, of being a true Christian. And I would think that as much as I would, I hate to say it to our modern world now, but I would think that most of what we call Christianity, they wouldn't call it Christianity at all. They'd probably think it's something ridiculous and, some sort of weird quietist, semi-pagan sort of philosophy group, but it wouldn't be Christianity.
And they consider things like the dispensationalists to just be what they used to call Judaizers.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of this would just be recapitulation of that's a heretical group.
No, absolutely, I agree. So I would say that the best 3 arguments we've got, the question of how do you define the Bible with sola scriptura? How did the early Christians see the church and see themselves, which is not something that's visible from the Bible, but something we can gather from temple worship. We can gather it from the early Christian documents about their fasting. Why aren't these people fasting or receiving the mysteries like St. Ignatius of Antioch talks about? And so that's really where what it really comes down to. I think that those arguments are basic arguments that the Orthodox have always used to answer Protestantism. And so I personally think that that's something that, it's the best way to address it. It depends on what the Protestant's saying to you. I can't imagine if a Protestant's telling you that Jesus is Lord, sure, agree with him, but then ask him what does that mean to him? That's really the best way to deal with it.
Okay, Ox Templar says, why do we not use instruments in our worship when we read the Psalms, saying to praise him with timbrel and lyre? What are our reasons for this, and how do we convince Protestants to abandon that tradition? Well, I should note, technically, most Protestants didn't embrace musical instruments until, I don't know, the organ was kind of what they kind of had in the Anglican Church, and that was rejected by half of it. I don't think the musical instrument thing in Protestantism, just to answer that, didn't come about really until you get to the 18th and 19th century. But I think one explanation would be that in the there's a difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That part of the fathers say that the use of instruments in the Old Testament had to do with kind of the carnal Israel. And what do you say, Father?
Well, I think that, quite frankly, I don't know that. I'm not too familiar with temple worship, so I can't say whether or not they were using the instruments in temple worship. I don't get the impression from the psalm that that's necessarily for temple worship, but I think it was just more because in many cases the psalms were not simply liturgical, but they were also intensely personal. And so, I don't mind praising the Lord with the timbrel and lyre. Just not in church. It's not something that we did in church, because really the church is modeled upon the worship of the temple, because we have the abiding sacrifice. We have God behind the veil of the temple. So we have to act in that manner. The question is to convince Prots to abandon that tradition. Well, it's not a tradition at all. It's something that's brand new. And, the point is, I wouldn't waste my time doing that. The point is, if you bring a Protestant to an Orthodox service and they're seeing people doing prostrations before icons, kissing relics, bowing in different directions, moving throughout the church and bowing when a censer comes out, I think they're going to be a little more worried about various things than a guitar.
And the one thing they bring up is, where's the piano?
Yeah. So I think that's...
Okay, so we went through the CIA question. Someone says, why did Protestants take books out of the Bible? Well, Luther took the Epistle of James out of the Bible because it contradicted his theology. But I think he also wanted to take the book of Revelation out of the Bible. And they also took the so-called Apocrypha, which the additional Old Testament books out. Because I know Maccabees was taken out because it taught prayer for the departed. So
yeah.
there were doctrinal reasons they did not want some of the... And it's a shame, because in the Book of Wisdom, the Wisdom of Solomon, there's a chapter which explicitly describes the crucifixion, the trial crucifixion of our Lord Jesus Christ. Almost, you can lay it along the passages found in the Gospel of Matthew when the priests mocked our Lord, the Jewish priests, and it's absolutely amazing. So, what do you say to that, Father?
Well, the question of, if we're talking about the New Testament books, like Luther taking out the Book of James, that just tells you what kind of people you were dealing with in the early part of the Reformation. As for the abandonment of the Greek canon for the Hebrew canon, I think the reasoning is terrible. I think that most of the attempts to go to a more original version of the biblical text were based upon the Masoretic text, which is itself a very late Hebrew recension that was done well after the Septuagint, and sometimes with the hope of distorting passages that meant something like Isaiah 7:14. So I think that it's kind of like, I think the reason that they took it out of the Bible, they don't realize it, but they're actually engaging in a program that was actually anti-Christian in origin. So the point is, it's like a crippled Christianity that they're supporting, basically, because what they're saying is that we'll take all those prophecies that you find in the Greek version of the Old Testament and the Aramaic version of the Old Testament out to make the Hebrews happy, but hopefully believe in Jesus anyway. Well, that's stupid, and so I don't respect it at all. So let's see what the next question is. Unless you had more to say, Father.
No, that's fine. Mount Athos Fire Service. Okay, so they say, can you refute Islam?
Please,
it's an emergency.
Please, fathers.
Oh, please, fathers. It's an emergency. I think I might join, and I need some really good arguments to stop them. So from Protestantism now to Islam.
Well, here's my argument. If you're honestly thinking that you're going to join Islam, 2 guys on YouTube are probably not going to save you. You really need to reconsider the nature of the religion that you want to join. If you are an Orthodox Christian, it is even more shameful that you should even imply such a thing. In all honesty, if you want to ask real questions about why you're not going to, then you should do that. And if you're just asking us to beg you to stay, well, Allahu Akbar, buddy, you can go that way and send yourself straight to hell. Do you want to do that? Don't do that. You can ask real questions.
The confrontational approach.
Well, say something like, can you refute Islam? They chop off Christians' heads. They're an embarrassment to earth.
Yep. Why do you need more than baptism to receive salvation?
Well, if you die, you don't.
I guess if you're baptized as an infant or you're baptized on your deathbed.
Yeah.
Right?
It just depends. I mean, you do because you need to live.
And also you can lose the grace of baptism.
Exactly.
After being baptized.
That's my point, is that if you have a life of grace, you need grace to move forward. So the point is, yeah, you don't need more than that if you're going to die, or if you baptized as an infant and die, so on and so forth. But if you do, you're going to fall, and you need the grace of the church to build you back up, to bring you back, and to get you to more levels of grace, to get you closer and closer to Christ through, theosis.
All right. What are the major differences between the Eastern Orthodox, the GOC, and your Orthodox Church? Which is the most canonical? How do we discuss this without getting hyper radical?
Yeah. Okay. Let's clarify a few things here. Okay, because our Orthodox Church, if you're referring to our synod, meaning myself and Father Enoch, is a GOC or a TOC, a true Orthodox or genuine Orthodox Church. The Eastern Orthodox Church is just the Church of Christ. The real distinction here is who is, in the time of heretical confusion, the true Orthodox Church. And so that's ultimately what it comes down to. No, if we were going based on things on paper, in terms of all of our official teachings, there would be very little difference except for things that came out in the 20th century, which are the very essence of what we're debating. The ecumenical movement, so on and so forth. And so there's, the point I'm trying to make is that the Orthodox Church, it's not like we're forming a brand new Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church is the Orthodox Church. We're in communion with true Orthodox in Greece. We're in communion with true Orthodox in Russia. We're in communion with true Orthodox in Bulgaria and Africa and Asia. The point is, and there's the official Orthodox Church, the canonical Orthodox Church. They consider themselves to be the Orthodox Church based on who is in communion with the Fanar. Unfortunately, now you have the Ukrainian issue. Well, which one's true Orthodox? The one's following Moscow or the one's following the Fanar? So the real question is, and for us, it is that the Orthodox Church must hold its fidelity to the canons of the Church. That's all it is. And if you're not doing that, you run the risk of falling away. And so when you get to genuine Orthodox or true Orthodox, etc., you have to follow the canons of the Church. And all Orthodox have to follow that, no matter what they call themselves or no matter what it is in 100 years.
Well, they have to follow in the canon, and following the canons, we mean following the faith also, because the canons teach. They say, you have to follow the faith. Mm-hmm. So, how do we discuss this without getting hyper radical?
I don't think you have to get hyper radical at all. You just point out the facts. As a matter of fact, I think people get hyper radical when they start calling each other names. I think
it's very easy in one aspect, because you can say, it's what's being taught at St. Vladimir's, Holy Cross, and all this. Let's say in America, the mainline seminaries, is that orthodoxy being taught in the OCA, the Greek Archdiocese, and all these other groups? I mean, you have clergy in ROCOR now teaching that the Old Testament is mythological. All right?
Yes.
Is that really orthodoxy? No, that's a heresy. That's not orthodoxy. And to say that somehow we need to join the groups that teach heresy, and if we don't, we're not canonical, is absolutely ridiculous. It's like the Arians saying Athanasius should just join us. Why is he making such a big deal about this?
Right, exactly. You know, a lot of the saints of the church would have been described as horrible extremists. Why didn't St. Mark of Ephesus just go along with everyone else? He could have just signed the union.
He could have just fought within, right?
Yeah, it would have been peaceful.
Well, you see, a lot of the arguments the official group use against us is basically the same type of argumentation that the papists use against the Orthodox, saying, "Well, you can be part of the Unia. Why do you need to cause problems? You know, you can still do all your same stuff."
All right, now I'm looking here. I see Nigel and the Mount Athos Fire Service. You know, they're kind of asking questions like 4 reasons why atheists should change their mind. Islam, you know, it's like maybe Islam is an interesting thing. Ridiculous request from Mount Athos saying, "Please, Father, help me," even though you haven't actually asked a single question except how to get away from Islam because I'm going to go join it. I mean, is that a real question? Here's what it comes down to. Jesus Christ came to the earth to save humanity. That's what it comes down to. We are all fallen. We're all going to go to hell. We're all going to fall. If you tell me, well, why do atheists have a claim? Atheists don't have a claim. The only thing they're doing is they're closing their eyes more to reality. They want to say, oh, there's nothing. Well, if you say, oh, there's nothing, you're just excusing yourself to do whatever you want. They say, oh, no, I can create my own morality. That's a lie. It's always a lie. And unfortunately, the Islamic thing, it's the same thing. They talk about, oh, well, you know, our women are so much more pious. Yeah, okay, but you've married like 10 of them, including the ugly ones, and, you know, you're allowed to keep them all. And, of course, that sounds great for your average, you know, guy living in a basement. But in reality, most men don't have the responsibility to take care of one wife. So I don't think that's, you know, I just think that the whole thing, Islam is based on a carnal understanding of reality, and atheism is a carnal understanding of reality that's also selfish. So, you know, it's that's basically what I have to take on that. And so I don't understand the point of, you know, arguing with it. If they make a legitimate question, which there are a few that they've tried, I'd be glad to answer them, but there are no real legitimate questions. Most of them are bait questions, or they're based upon misinterpretations in their books. So that's, and I agree with Basil. The Fount of Knowledge by St. John of Damascus is probably the best and clearest work on the matter. You know, it answers it from the perspective of somebody who was there when Islam was still new and thought it was just as ridiculous as we do now.
Okay, so Basil has a question.
Mm-hmm.
He says, did the Western Fathers clearly teach a distinction between ousia and energia or dynamis, that is, between essence and energies? Don't know if you guys got these questions I sent a while ago. Well, certainly you find in the Lateran Synod of 649, it distinguishes and teaches between essence and operations. And that synod was attended by, 100 Italian bishops and promulgated by Pope St. Martin. And it was received by the other Western churches. So, you know, I think they quote St. Augustine, they quote St. Ambrose. So the Italian bishops at Lateran 649 certainly believed that when they were quoting St. Augustine and St. Ambrose and other Western fathers, along with the Eastern fathers, that they were teaching the same thing. And the question is, who are we to say that we know better than, you know, Pope St. Martin the Martyr and St. Maximus the Confessor about what they taught? Because we know, for example, St. Maximus knew Latin. I think in one of the lives of St. Maximus, in a few of his letters, he actually mentions this. Because remember, St. Maximus had been a civil servant in the Byzantine Empire going back to the year 600 and 610. And until around 630, the official language of the Byzantine Empire for government services was actually Latin. And so the idea that somehow St. Maximus didn't know Latin for him to basically take the civil service exam or their equivalent and to conduct government business, he would have known Latin. To say that somehow he didn't is ridiculous. So what do you say, Father?
Well, I mean, I would agree with that. What's it called in general? Looking at following a couple of the other questions here that are surprising me a little bit. But I'm sorry, I just drifted off. Hold on. see here.
Okay, so someone has a specific question about Islam.
What was the specific question?
Is Islam's God the same God as ours, or just a wrong interpretation?
It's a philosophical question. The point is, if you believe in one God and you assume that there is one God, then ultimately, if you philosophically accept that, one could say that it's the same God. The question is what that God would be saying. Obviously, if he's saying what we are teaching versus what Islam is teaching, then one of those interpretations of God is lying. And so ultimately, you have to make the determination as to which one that is. So that's, I think that's one of the things that people don't understand about the difference, because people like to say, well, Islam considers Jesus a prophet. Yeah, well, Jesus didn't consider himself a prophet. He considered himself the Son of God. As was once written, I forget which, it was some Catholic catechist from before, I think it was before Vatican II, was making an argument for God. He makes a point about Jesus Christ, and he said, you cannot say that Jesus Christ is a good person, but not the Son of God. You can't say he's a great guy, I like Jesus' teachings, but I don't believe in him as God. Because Jesus Christ spoke as God. He said he was God. And so you have two choices. You can either believe that Jesus was crazy, or you can believe that Jesus was God. Those are your choices.
And also, remember, Muhammad claimed to be interacting with the angel Gabriel, but we believe was actually a demon in a demonic fit. So, and even when he claimed to have revelations from Allah, we don't believe either he was basically lying, and either Muhammad was lying about these, was insane, or he was receiving direct demonic communications, or a combination of all three.
It's worth noting that Allah in Arabic just means God.
Well, it means the God, actually. Al is the article the, and Ilah means God. So it literally is a contraction of Al-Ilah, which means the God.
Yes, I'm aware.
And they do, and I know, you're correct. And they do have, there is some arguments that the Christian community has, and some of the ancient texts did use the word Al-Allah, the God, to refer to.
Right, and actually now in Indonesia, because of the fact that Allah is used in certain versions of the Bible, the Muslims are trying to get those versions banned and get Christians arrested who are using it, because they want to make sure that they separate out their understanding of God from the Christian understanding of God, even though they're co-opting a word that wasn't theirs to begin with. So the conception of God is wrong. And when I see, so when they talk about Christ, I know that what they're saying is wrong. And when they're talking about, they talk about how the message was changed. I talked about this on previous shows. They claimed that the martyrs and all the early church, that they changed the meaning of what Christ said for money. So they were willing to die for Christ, but they were willing to lie about him for money?
That's kind of the argument of a lot of the Protestants who say that the church fell away in the 2nd century or something like that.
But we're not even talking yet. Well, they usually say it fell away in the 4th century with Constantine. But the Muslims go so far as to say it fell away in the 1st century.
Well, that's the Mormon argument, too. The Mormons say the same thing. And they both claim to have a prophet figure who had a bunch of wives and was controversial, and he had a new book, and he had a new interpretation. So Islam and Mormonism actually have a lot of things in common, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, they do, and it's kind of depressing in that sense.
Okay, can you both critique lay orders and the bizarro scapular type devotion among the papists? Now, I remember, wasn't there the stuff around the Carmelites and a few others that you had to wear this scapula, and if you did, you never go to purgatory or something like that? Do you remember some of that stuff, Father?
Okay, what about purgatory?
So that? Basil's asking questions about.
I see the question.
Okay, he wants us to critique the lay Roman Catholic orders and the bizarro scapular type devotions among the papists. The bizarro scapular type devotions, as I recall, were things that were initially there was this Carmelite brown scapula stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Now, technically, they've now come out to kind of admit that the claim that Simon Stock, who was, I guess, the founder of the Carmelites, they kind of maybe the founder. They really don't know when they came about, sometime in the 13th century or such.
Mm-hmm.
That a lot of these visions that were attributed to him were basically made up like 100 years later. And, I think some of the stuff was that if you wear the brown scapula, you'll never go to hell. And, that you won't, or your time in purgatory will be reduced. Because, I don't know, the Virgin appeared to somebody in a vision and said, if you wear the brown scapula, then, you will spend half the amount of time as you need to spend in purgatory.
Yeah.
So the lay orders, what are Roman? I'm not too familiar with Roman Catholic papist lay orders.
Okay, now, yeah. Well, here's where what I think he's talking about, because you have to realize that when you're thinking of a scapular, you're thinking in terms of a monastic vestment.
Oh, you mean like the third order convent, like the lay?
Yeah, he's talking about those little string things that are actually, they're not actually like real scapulars, so on and so forth. The point is, all of those things all the lay orders came about because of the fact that the concept of the oblatus was lost. The concept of the worker attached to the monastery was lost, and the concept of even a monastic house being a solid place was lost. These concepts became kind of like I hate to say it, but they kind of, if you take the Franciscans, even though they had houses, they were like, the whole point was they were supposed to be wandering monks, and so these were supposed to be wandering lay people following the wandering monks, and the whole thing's kind of just wacky. The point is, people are supposed to be attached to a monastery. If they don't have to be, but if they're going to be attached to a monastery, that's how they do it as workers. That exists, by the way, in Eastern monasteries too. It's not just Western monasteries. I don't think there's a formal name for it like there is, even though I don't think there was really much of a formal name for it until after the 11th and 12th centuries.
In the 10th century, they would have called these the familiar people.
Right, but they wouldn't have been right now we call them like the third order Benedictines or something. That's ridiculous. Or, the Benedictine. I even think the term Benedictine oblates is wrong, because I think the term Benedictine is wrong. I think it's just monasticism, according to the rule of St. Benedict. And I think people just like keeping those stupid names from Roman Catholicism where they can say, I am an oblate of the order of St. Benedict.
Yeah.
In fact, after their names and stuff.
Yes. And in fact, I believe in the 10th, if you would ask somebody in the year 1000 in England, where's the Benedictine monastery? It would have been a superfluous, how do you say, an overlap. It'd be like saying, going to a monastery in Russia and saying, where are the Basilian monasteries? Well, all the monasteries are Basilian. We don't even call it Basilian because that's the only type of, the monasticism, even the so-called Studite monasticism was simply a form of the quote-unquote Basilian monasticism.
Yeah.
And even St. Benedict talks about how he encourages people to read the Confidences of St. John Cassian and the Rule of St. Basil, because he considers those to be important to be read. So even there's no indication St. Benedict he nor his successors had any idea they were founding a new monastic order. They were just trying to establish monasteries following a rule that had accumulated over time. And remember, St. Benedict wrote his rule, and I believe was under divine inspiration. That just in the same sense that the other fathers were guided by God to write their rules, because he saw a lot of problems in how monasteries of his days were forming. Like, for example, during St. Benedict's time, one of the problems was the prevalence of Celtic monasticism, which is in itself not bad, but the problem is that a lot of the Celtic monastics were reading the Conference of St. John Cassian and other Egyptian desert father rules and trying to apply these in a strict sense universally. And it got to the point where people could not literally survive off eating an ounce of bread a day and doing 5 hours of work and reciting the entire Psalter in one day as part of the divine office. And people ended up giving up, leaving the monastery because they thought, well, look, I can't do 15 hours of service a day. I can't, sleep 2 hours a night. I can't do this. I can't do that. And St. Benedict saw that. And even though St. Benedict was trained by St. Romanus, the monk, who was a hermit, and St. Benedict was extremely ascetic, and he was always extremely ascetic, he realized once he began to found monasteries that trying to have these strict, for example, the rules the Irish monks were using, or a lot of the Celtic monks and others were, harsh as the Desert Fathers rules. They don't even follow those in most Eastern monasteries today. None do. And so St. Benedict wrote his rule with the purpose of basically clearing away a lot of abuses. Because if you have a group of men who were trying to, let's say, have a divine office system in which all 150 psalms are said in one day, and they have to work 5 to 8 hours of physical labor. They sleep 2 or 3 hours. Most people, unless they've been trained anchorites like St. Anthony the Great, are not going to be able to do that as a novice or being a monk 1 or 2 years. And so St. Benedict saw a lot of people just leave monasteries over these issues. But despite that, of course, this rule of St. Benedict is still a difficult rule to follow. As much as people want to talk about it being a moderate rule, it is moderate. But it's not extreme like doing 1,000 prostrations in a day, and it's not laissez-faire where you can do whatever you want. And a lot of it was, for example, you have the steps of humility, but not to get too far off the point, in that the monastic question was there. And even in the pre-schism period, part of the problem was that there was really no reason to have these lay orders, or even the attachments the lay orders had to the Franciscans and others. Because, for example, the Franciscanism was founded as, I might be mistaken, you might know more about this, Father, but I think it was founded obviously by Francis of Assisi, but it was founded to be kind of what? A
mendicant order.
Mendicant order, kind of like were the Dominicans the same? Were the Dominicans, were they came a little bit earlier, I believe. Yeah. And the problem is that centuries before this,
the Dominicans were the first group to become a mendicant order, and the Franciscans were the next major one.
Yes.
The first order, of course, being males, the second order being females, nuns, and the third order being lay people.
Yes.
All this stuff is really 13th century and later.
Yes. And I think there was one of the I think St. Chrodegang of Metz, who lived in the 760s, I believe, stated that you have the monasteries, which follow the monastic life, and then you have the he hate to use the word secular, the non-monastic clergy, and their purpose is to follow the divine, is to still sing the divine office, but to be pastoral toward the people.
Well, yeah, but that would be more the lay clergy, not the. That wouldn't be.
Well, again, all I'm saying is that the idea of creating distinct. Well, the first problem is creating distinct religious orders like the Franciscans, the Dominicans. That's the root of the problem.
The reason why the orders were created, Father, is much more practical than that, and it's also wrong. And that is, once you take out the monastic house, then exactly where are these monks going? Well, we look in the Rule of St. Benedict, and it talks about how monks shouldn't be wandering about to and fro, but that's literally what they did. I mean, if you look at the wiki on mendicant orders, it literally says, in another innovation, the mendicant orders relinquished their principle of stability, a classical principle of ancient monasticism, opting for a different approach.
Yeah, St. Benedict had a name for those people.
Yeah.
He called them gyrovagues.
Yeah. So basically, the entire mendicant order system, the entire third order system, all of that is based upon something that St. Benedict condemned.
Yep. Okay, so, Basil says, did the West engage in Eucharistic adoration pre-schism? Here, this is a complicated question. They did just as much as the East did. That is, for example, St. Nicholas Cabasala says that when the priest, during the pre-sanctified liturgy, comes out with the body and blood of the Lord, everybody's to prostrate and worship. But that's part of a liturgical service, of theoretically communion. All right? You're going to take communion theoretically at a pre-sanctified. They did not have a distinct office where they had like a monstrance and they put a host in there and they processed around with it around the village. That did not exist. That's something that came about, Julian of Liège in the late 1100s due to a vision she had, and there are a number of other French nuns and women who had visions. So that kind of stuff is much. In fact, all this kind of later post-schism papist stuff from the 11 and 1200s. This is after the schism, so they've lost the grace of the church. So they're basically wandering around. The mass becomes kind of a show. That's all. It has devoid of consecrating grace. There's no consecration of the mysteries happening. At which point, they began to take monstrances, which originally had been reliquaries for displaying relics and blessing people with relics, and putting kind of the rounded wafer, the new unleavened bread rounded wafer. And this also goes with the fact that they had to start getting rid of some of the prefaces in the 1100s. Because if you got these pesky 24th Sunday after Pentecost prefaces, which state that we get rid of the old unleavened bread so we can have the new bread, you can't really use that. So the West did not have Eucharistic adoration in that sense of a separate service processing around before this schism that did not exist. Father Joseph?
Yeah, I would say that, when you're talking about Eucharistic adoration, you have to ask. I always have to ask, what do you mean? And the reason I ask, what do you mean, is because, of course, it is the body and blood of Christ. We bow before it. We do adore it before we receive it. But if you're asking from a Roman Catholic perspective, because those are the only people I know who make a big deal about it, with the perpetual adoration chapels, the adoration and the exposition and all that fun stuff, then no, it is a 13th century innovation. And it has made its way into the Western Rite of the Antiochians. I've actually had arguments about this. No, there is no concept of it before well after the schism. And so, no, it's not well after Hildebrand and Anselm and so on and so forth. It's an innovation. That's all it is. You can bow before the Eucharist there. You don't need to stare at it. You don't need to stare at it for an hour. You don't need to keep it company for an hour in a 24-hour cycle. You need to consume it.
And our Lord said, "Take, eat, this is my body."
Yeah, not take
stare. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Basil says, Muslims and Jews, I always figured they could not worship in spirit and truth if they reject Christ. After all, is not the synagogue the dwelling place of Satan, or rather a dwelling place? And I'd say the mosque too. Is this just not? Let's just not single out the Jews. Let's say the mosque is not a holy place either.
It is the synagogue of Satan, is how it's referred to, not necessarily. So I would think that any parasynagogue, any false, quote unquote church, so on and so forth, is
Mormons, for example. Yeah.
But yeah, it's unfortunately, and people don't like hearing that, because it's a lot of fun when we can just say it's about to Jews, or it's a lot of fun when we can say we're pointing to the 9/11 killers and stuff like that. But when you consider that hell is open to all those Americana type things with the Baptist Church and their happy Masonic, for their happy Masonic, barbecues in the summer, that they're gonna probably go to the same hell too, because
hell is a democracy, heaven's a kingdom.
Exactly. And so the point is, it's sad, and I'll tell you one of the things, Father, and I know I'm going off topic here, but the thought occurred to me that we really are in an age and an era where we can really do street preaching for Orthodoxy. And what I mean by that is that we actually have the information needed, and we are in the sort of high information society. Not saying that society has lots of information that it uses regularly, but that it has a lot of information at its fingertips to fully answer questions and really get people into the church without using emotionalism, which is what Protestants use when they preach on the street. We can actually get into real questions, we've been answering questions online now for 2 months, just to see who can ask any question.
If we can do it, anybody can, right?
Well, anyone who's learned their apologetics, who knows how to defend the faith, who's going to church, why not put up a sign that says, ask me how, with an Orthodox cross behind it?
Convince me Orthodoxy isn't the true church.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so I'm just saying. Okay, so that was just a side digression that I think really,
let's kind of we're answering these questions, but let's get back also to the title program, True Orthodoxy versus False Ecumenism, False Extremism.
Yeah.
And I think there are other besides the Kirikites, and I think that's true. But the related movements. This is all part of almost a what's often been called a right wing. I hate to use that word, but renovationism from the right.
Yep. Father Seraphim Rose talked about that.
Exactly, and he pointed out people like Lazar Pahalo, Michael Askell. Let's name names. All right, let's be specific here, so people know to stay away from these people. And I've dealt with.
I think Michael Askell's dead, isn't he?
No, he's an elderly man. But his ideas or his books, things he's written, he's never renounced them. So we have to deal with those ideas.
Yeah, and there's a lot of heresy, and it's not just.
And he has a lot of supporters still who go around with this stuff. And I've dealt with both of these people. And my impression is they have a high view that their intellect, this is the same thing with other people we've dealt with, that their intellect, trumps the teachings of the fathers.
Right.
That when you bring up to them, and I've done this literally too, brought this up to them in communications, what St. Photius says, where St. Photius says, even if first St. Photius was like, I don't believe that St. Augustine said these things. I think there's probably interpolations, which may be true. But St. Photius said, secondly, even if St. Augustine did say the things the Frankish opponents were saying he said about these theological issues, St. Photius' view is that he'd still be a saint because this was before these questions were handled by councils, and it wasn't really clear, but I still accept him as a saint. Okay? But when you bring this up, they say, well, St. Photius didn't understand Orthodox tradition. Now, if you're going to say St. Photius did not understand Orthodox tradition,
then really, who did?
Then who does understand Orthodox tradition? If St. John Maximovich did not understand Orthodox tradition, because I've heard some of these same type of people,
absolutely.
They will privately attack St. John Maximovich, saying that, well, he charismated French Roman Catholics. Well, therefore, he's not really Orthodox. If he was really a saint, he would have seen that the chrismation had no effect and blah, blah. I mean, I've heard this stuff from these people and their followers, and it gets really, really annoying, and it's blasphemy, where they, in essence, think they know more about Orthodoxy than St. Photius, than St. John Maximovich. And, it's just like the idea of people who will, talk nice about St. John Maximovich and say he's a saint, but then they're basically ignore all the work he did on the Western Rite.
Yeah.
And how are you going to do that?
My favorite is he repented of the Western Rite on his deathbed.
Yeah, his deathbed. He didn't have a deathbed. He died in a chair, and they found him the next morning. Yeah, exactly. And remember, he also said, interestingly, if I have died, know that they've killed me. So that's always been an interesting remark. But that's a false extremism to say that St. Augustine's not a saint, to take St. Isidore and Leander off the calendar, which they did in Hockna.
Yep.
And there are people in World Orthodoxy who follow just along with that, the whole Romanides type people.
Yep.
Even though I've been able to show in manuscript evidence that even a lot of these references in the Filioque in the works of St. Isidore are much later interpolations. So if you're going to take somebody off the calendar, are you going to at least give them the courtesy of researching their manuscript tradition? No, they're not. Sorry.
No, I agree. I think it's horrible, but you're right. That's the false extremism we're talking about. It's not left-wing extremism. It's and I don't even want to say right-wing. It's a different angle.
I think what happened was that Father Seraphim, I think he talks about renovationism from the right and left, and he said it because in the right, it seems like it's being more correct.
Right, and it's not.
Where in the left, it's like lovey-dovey, everything's all right, and there's really no difference between everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So, that I guess that's more in the sense, but it's still all the same spirit, ultimately.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's still renovationism.
Yes, and that pervades everywhere, and it's just like you find the same people who will talk about, for example, same thing with Matthewites, but there are Floronites and there are World Orthodox people who do this, where they will say, we're going to commemorate all the saints of England.
I hate
but it's ridiculous. But okay, all right. But then they're going to do that, and then you're going to say, "What do you think about the Mass Saint Dunstan celebrated? It's Roman Catholic."
Yeah.
What do you think about the Mass Saint Cuthbert celebrated? It's Roman Catholic. Well, then that shows
why
you right
celebrate
there.
Why? Yeah, exactly. It's hypocrisy at its.
They're doing, and they're being gimmicky because they want to say, "Oh, we celebrate the ancient priests and Western saints," when they really don't care about them.
No.
I mean, it's one thing, in my opinion. And here, I know everybody's going to say I'm pontificating. All right.
No, please feel free.
Okay. All right. It's one thing, and I've known people who converted to Orthodoxy, and all they had was the Eastern Rite, and they do like the Western priests and Western saints, and they've been Eastern Rite for 40 years was the only option, and their view is that that's just how I was raised, and I have no objection to that if that's all you had.
Yeah.
All right. And some of them write Lives of the Saints, or do translations of Lives of the Saints and things like that. I've seen that, and that's very good.
Very holy stuff.
Exactly. But it's a different thing to translate or to pretend to write Lives of the Priests and Western Saints, but then to do things where you shift out their terminology. They'll take out the word Mass or the dismissal or the different liturgical aspects that are in the Lives of the Saints and basically omit them completely because they're like, well, an Eastern person would never understand this. And so they kind of sanitize the Western Lives of the Saints and the Priests and Saints to make them almost like they could be interchangeable liturgically with, I don't know, St. Nicephorus in 9th century Constantinople.
Well, that's their ultimate goal, is the reasoning.
Exactly. And to pretend they never really celebrated the Western Rite.
Yeah, so it's embarrassing, but yeah, that's true.
But so you have these attacks on St. Augustine, you have the attacks on the Telonia, for example, the whole toll house concept. And again, even if you look at someone like Metropolitan Macarius of Moscow in his book Orthodox Dogmatic Theology, his 2-volume book, he has a very balanced overview of this, where he says that, we accept in essence the teaching. That is, there's a dispute between angels and demons. And he says that, there's a lot of visions, and some of them can have things added to and all the rest, but we accept the basics of what's being talked about. All right? And, it's a very balanced overview of things, where he accepts in essence the Telonia, but people like Askell, like Puhalo, and they're basically everybody who follows them, they'll basically say Metropolitan Macarius didn't know what he was talking about. No one knew what they were talking about until Lazar Puhalo, Michael Askell, and their followers apparently came up with all these views. So it's just one thing after the other, and then they'll point out, well, this is. And then you ask them, what do you know about the manuscript tradition about St. Isidore or St. Augustine? And they're like, oh, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to write a book attacking them, maybe you should actually research their manuscripts.
Yeah, basically.
All right. So that's false extremism, people like that.
Well,
right? Just as much as the Kiriakite craziness.
Well, I don't. They intersect though, so there's no point.
Oh no, yeah, you're right. They all essentially believe the same thing, even if they don't admit they believe the same thing. Okay, so so now this goes to a point Basil's bringing up where he says, at the Union of Brest-Litovsk, Catholics, quote unquote, accepted contradictory theology a la Eastern Catholicism. Can you guys give a general critique of the style of theology and influences at St. Vladimir Seminary? I know this is a broad question, but your answer may help others. Yeah, I've known people who've gone there. I know you've known, Father, people who've gone there. I don't know if he still teaches there, but there was a professor, his name escapes me. I know we're naming names, but his name escapes me. But he taught Old Testament. And he basically taught Old Testament documentary hypothesis that Moses never existed. Adam and Eve were mythological figures. The Pentateuch was composed by, 4 different traditions of various redactors. Isaiah had 2 or 3 different authors. And this was formative teaching.
Yeah, this is critical biblical.
And that was everybody was expected to accept and believe that. That was the official position of St. Vladimir Seminary. And that's a heretical position. That's heresy. All right? So why didn't the OCA care? Well, I don't think they cared because basically they came out of the whole St. Sergius Institute stuff. And there were people actually at the St. Sergius Institute that protested this stuff in the 20s and 30s, and they all got kicked out.
I think also that you have to remember, I might be wrong here. St. Vladimir Seminary was originally part of a Union Theological Seminary.
Yep.
And then when it separated, I think they were just so happy that they got their own little seminary there in Crestwood that it never occurred to them that the theology that had developed, from basically working under the aegis of the Anglicans was just heavily flawed.
Yeah, well, flawed, heretical.
Yeah.
And to Paul Tarazzi. Yep, exactly. Basil, that's exactly who I'm talking about. I knew a priest who was friends with Paul Tarazzi's nephew. And the nephew said, I'm going to have to leave going to St. Vladimir's because my uncle has destroyed my faith. So, but you still have people like John Beer, who I think is the dean, and he published a book called Orthodox Fundamentalism, where he attacks people who believe.
He's not as bad as.
But he still attacks people who believe in the historical understanding of the Old Testament.
Yeah, no,
and he attacks people who are against ecumenism, and he attacks people who are against modernism.
The problem is that a lot of these guys, they create paper tigers. I remember,
and like John Beer refuses ever to debate or interact with even mainline fighting from within people. Because they know it's just like the whole public orthodoxy type people. That's the same kind of atmosphere that kind of runs St. Vladimir's and all these other groups. That they as much as they accuse us of really not dealing with reality and all this other nonsense, they never deal with the fact that they can't produce a single saint who taught anything remotely like they're teaching.
Oh yeah, well that's because
none of them did.
Well, the unfortunate thing is that I feel bad because St. Vladimir's is one of the larger seminary presences. Somebody did ask earlier, he said, this Ox Templar, he said, I'm being baptized in the Antiochian OC and I hope to become a monk in Rokor. Did you answer this question, Father?
No, I didn't even see it. I've been talking,
monk in Roquefort, a very conservative monastery. I'm having spiritual struggles with canonicity. What to do?
Okay. Well, we wouldn't accept any of those groups as canonical because of the whole humanism and modernism issue.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, well, if he's
asking us, so
if he, well, first off, if you're being baptized in the Antiochians, that's a plus. I'm curious as to, because usually they chrismate everyone.
And also, when they do, and are they going to do immersion baptism? Because a lot of these photos I've been seeing on Facebook of Facebook friends who say, "Well, I was just baptized by the Greek and Antiochian priests." They basically hold their head over a font and they pour water on it.
Really?
I've seen this numerous. In fact, there was one. I know I've seen this numerous times. No, I've seen this numerous times. Oh. And I had one. I commented years ago when I in a post where I said, baptism has to be triple immersion. That's why I made these triple immersion posts recently. All right, because I've seen this a lot. And people will contact me and say, "How dare you say that? My godson was just baptized, and they just poured water in his head."
Well, you got to feel for them because that response is an emotional response. Ultimately, Father, you point out stuff like that, they're going to feel cheated.
Well, they should feel cheated. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but then they're going to be mad at you because they feel cheated, so it's understandable.
Well, argue with St. Gregory the Great. Don't argue with me.
Well, they should really be arguing with the parish priests that cheaped out on the baptism. Is what they should be doing. Especially if they donate it.
Hold on, my headphones came unplugged.
Okay. But in any case, so yeah, it's a tough question. I don't usually do this. Somebody brought it up in a recent Facebook chat with me, so I may as well throw this out there. I have mentioned this before. Among the true Orthodox, the two largest bodies that exist are our communion and the communion between that of Archbishop Kallinikos of Athens and the and Metropolitan Agafangel of the Roquefort under the same. Basically, those are the two largest communions of true Orthodox. In our case, we have churches in Greece, Russia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Western Europe, different parts of Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia. The point I'm trying to make is that the Catholicity of the Church, if you are truly interested in avoiding uncanonicity, then I would suggest you find a true Orthodox church. I would also suggest that before making excuses that you can't find a true Orthodox church, to look at our synod and the other, the largest synods in communion in the true Orthodox churches, before you go to the first tiny little synod that promises that they're going to make you a priest once they have complete and total mental obedience from you.
Yeah, once they brainwash you.
Yeah. Try to find a true Orthodox church. If you can't, and you're being offered a real baptism, full immersion, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, I personally say just that needs to be your primary focus. I'm a little concerned because it says you're hoping to become a monk, which kind of means that you've kind of thought this plan out. I don't know. You're a monk, Father, in monasticism. I don't know what you have more to say on that.
Well, to me, when I was baptized, I hate to phrase it like this because it was much more than that. But from a practical perspective, I really didn't have many options if I wanted to go to church at a true Orthodox church. All right.
Explain more.
Well, I mean, I lived in North Carolina. There was basically nothing there. And what was there eventually collapsed not long after I left for true Orthodoxy. There was the Ephraimites, but they weren't true Orthodox. That's kind of the Elder Ephraim stuff, but they kind of turned out to have a lot of problems with it. But I basically said when I was baptized by Metropolitan John, I was like, well, I would like to join the monastery. And his initial reaction was to say, okay, go back home, wait. I think he wanted me to wait 3 months, all right, and continue contacting me because it was, I guess, the only way we could have at that point of testing whether I really wanted to actually become a novice. And I just kept on calling and say, well, look, there's really nothing for me here, and I want to become a monk. And eventually he said, okay, get your plane ticket, get your stuff, come up here, and the rest is history, basically. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with getting baptized and then wanting to become a monk. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. Some
Now,
people
how old
believe.
are you when that happened?
Pardon me. Let me see. It was 2016. Hold on. Hold on. I was 17, 18, 19. I was 23 when I was baptized. So, to be honest, I can give you my honest opinion is that I wish I had basically become a monk when I was 18. I wish I had gotten baptized when I was 8 years before and become a monk, because the period from after high school until I was 23, I didn't really do much. There wasn't really anything of redeeming value in that period that I did. I mean, I did help my family and such, and that was good, I guess. Like taking.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. This is how, normally we don't talk about this, but this is how far back I go with Father Enoch. I remember when he was a novice. He was actually he was actually one of the people moving hot water when my son was baptized, my youngest son. He was actually.
I was at the baptism. I remember.
Right, they didn't have hot water, so you and Dennis were literally running up, getting boiled water to put
you're right.
water in the baptistry. Yep. It was pretty funny. And that was back when he was a novice. So that was, a decade.
Yeah, that was back when I was Nathaniel. That was my baptismal name.
Yeah, so that was ages ago. But the point is that becoming a monk is, it's a real thing, and there's a purpose to it. But, I don't think you were ever expecting to be, you weren't expecting to be Hieromonk Enoch or doing your own show.
Well, I know. I mean, not my actually. What my first few years, I was hoping that eventually I would be given the highest level, quote unquote, the great schema. I know we don't technically. It's not technically a term used in the Rule of Saint Benedict, but kind of. Yeah. I was thinking eventually, I'm just going to build a hut after enough years in the monastery, and I'll basically go live in the hut. And I'll be kind of a semi hermit. That was what I was hoping for, but I was told explicitly that you got to wait a long time to do that, because what oftentimes happens is that if you want to do that, if you go out on your own, if you just go out on your own and do that, Saint Benedict warns against that, because he says people can be deceived. That and in many ways, living even in the small community of a few people can be much more difficult than living by yourself in the middle of the woods in a hut, because dealing with people can actually be much. I mean, if you go to the monastery thinking you're going to escape having to deal with people, you're kind of wrong. You're going to have to still deal with people, but hopefully they're going to be, as a rule, different than in the world. But you're still going to have to learn to deal with social dynamics and such. So again, I would say that if somebody wants to become a monk after being baptized, they need to go find a monastery that's true monastery and confessing monastery, and a good abbot and a good spiritual father, and go that route. I know there has become a habit in Orthodoxy, basically in the past 120 years, where people are being made monks without technically being members of a monastery for 1, 2, or 3 years, without kind of being made. Now I know that's going on, and I'm not attacking anybody who does that, but that technically is kind of a diversion from the tradition of these on these matters.
Well, it's literally creating gyrovates.
Yes, and generally what happens is you have an older man who, let's say in his 60s and 70s, and he's been let's say a reader or something for several years, and and let's say his wife died years before, and they want to make him a priest for a mission. Well, he's not going to get married again. And so what's come about is the view that, well, if you're going, you can't. So the idea is that in Orthodoxy, you don't want to ordain somebody a celibate priest without giving them vows, so that people make them monks. Now, there was an attempt to solve this in 1718 in the Russian Church, where they said, well, you can ordain a celibate man without making him a monk if he's over 45 years old. And I guess the idea was that, he's kind of old enough, 45, 50, where, it's not going to be an issue. But giving the monastic vows doesn't necessarily solve the issue of still having even a guy in his 50s running a mission, even if he's been given monastic. I mean, hopefully the monastic vows and the service should give him some extra grace. But I'm just saying, I'm not attacking. I know that's dumb, broke Orthodox. A lot of people do that. But I'm just saying that's kind of being done and in a situation where Orthodoxy is not really operating like it should. Even in Russia, and in Greece and all these other people that are part of the official world Orthodox, they still do stuff like this.
Yeah.
And because unfortunately, since the collapse of the Russian Empire, that had reverberating effects throughout the entire Orthodox world. The rise of communism, Masonry taking over the Greek patriarchates, ecumenism, ecumenical heresy, the new calendarists, all this other stuff came about, and everything about Orthodoxy kind of got heavily affected and distorted. In the case of America, I think there was this issue where you had a lot of like Russian hieromonks that kind of fled to the United States in the 20s and 30s, and they tried to put a lot of them at Jordanville, but a lot of them didn't want to live at Jordanville, so they kind of just made them parish clergy. Sometimes they were widowed, sometimes they weren't. And we can critique that and say this is ideally shouldn't be done, but that's just how it should be done. But I will say that I would technically say that I don't think it's a good idea to simply make somebody a monk and just leave them as a lay monk out of the middle of nowhere, because you have to be at a community somewhere. Someone has to watch you. That's the issue, if you know what I mean. And I wasn't expecting any of that. I got made a deacon basically because I was 25 and they needed a deacon. And the only reason I got made a priest was because the other two priests that were helping the bishop here had strokes or had physical disabilities. So I was like, well, generally they were going to wait a few more years, but I kind of became what I call the supply priest, auxiliary priest. But if the situation had been different, if we'd had many, many more monks, I would have loved never having to have been even made a deacon. Simply because when you take these higher grades like deacon and priest, much more is expected of you. When you make a mistake,
so the stakes are higher.
Exactly, it's much higher. Exactly, and so what ends up happening, and this happens to a lot of people who become priests and deacons, is they end up saying to the bishop, "Can you please release me from the diacon or the priesthood? I just can't deal with this anymore."
Or they just do something that gets them kicked out.
Exactly. Or the worst thing is people will say, "Well, the bishop's not going to release me. What am I going to do?" Well, I don't know. I'll do something crazy, and they're having no choice but to depose me.
Or they don't even go that far. Sometimes, and I hate to say this, but a lot of the times, people who get ordained priests because of sheer ambition. And it
never works, and that never works out unless you're like really evil.
No, and it doesn't. And
it never works out spiritually. What I'm saying, if you're really evil, that can actually a lot of people who are really evil and really ambitious, can try to take over organizations.
Yeah,
but the ordinary ambitious person will self-destruct after a few years.
Yeah.
So you have to be a special kind of bad to actually make the ambition, quote unquote, work in that system.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of that in Orthodoxy at the moment.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, that's true.
Okay, so next question is so Baser made the point that Father John Baer doesn't even seem to teach the historic resurrection of Christ. I believe you're accurate. These people
before you go on, I should mention to Matthew Thompson, best argument against sola scriptura. You might want to listen to the broadcast earlier on because we actually did talk about that one already today.
Yes.
Go ahead.
But no, I agree. I mean, when you ask a lot of these people from these seminaries, do you believe in the historic resurrection of Christ? They'll fudge and say stuff like, I believe in the resurrection of the Christ spirit. Or they'll make a distinction between,
I believe in the Christ event.
Yeah, exactly. Or they'll say stuff like, I believe in the historical Jesus, but I believe in the resurrection of Christ. And as soon as you hear a dichotomy between Jesus and Christ, they're basically saying Jesus was an historical figure. He's dead. Christ is this mythological feeling figure in your heart or mind, and it animates people and blah, 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 this other stuff. And Christ does animate people spiritually, but Christianity isn't historical religion. You cannot gnosticize it away. So it's a set of abstract principles. That is not Christianity.
I'll be honest with you, Father. Like a lot of these things, if you look at one thing that surprised me was when I learned that stuff like NFTU gets passed around quietly, in these seminaries. And so I imagine that eventually some of these YouTube things will as well. And I just have to wonder for anyone who goes to, St. Vladimir's or stuff like this, and I read the stuff and I hear this stuff about, like, what this Father John Bear is teaching. Why aren't you guys rioting in the streets? Like, I mean, I'd have burned down his office by now if I was a student. I would have just, like, I don't know. I can't humanly imagine having a professor teaching this, like, complete and utter heretical trash and not, like, totally, like, I don't know, even just put a dead fish in his office or something. I mean, do something. Make him feel uncomfortable. That's gross.
He'll accuse you of being the dreaded fundamentalist.
Yeah, but oh boy. Uh-oh.
Well, again,
if that's the most he'll accuse me of, then there's got to be worse you can do, kids. I mean, cover his.
The simple answer is people like him control the seminary. So all the professors, for example, it's the same thing that happened in Protestantism. Years and years ago, when I was a Protestant, when I was like 12 years old or 13 years old, I remember being a Sunday school class, and the Sunday school teacher was like, "I'm going to go to Duke Seminary," and he was a conservative Protestant, and he went there, and they almost destroyed his faith, such as it was, within a semester, because they were teaching him the Old Testament is historically erroneous. We don't really know if Christ, we can't really say Christ rose from the dead as a historic fact. They begin to tear everything apart with this whole Bar Ehrman stuff, for example. And, now eventually that one guy actually had to grow a thicker skin, and he basically kind of left it all. That whole, sin. But it's the same thing happens. You have people who may be part of a mainline Orthodox church or group, and they may, in fact, because of, reading, old catechisms and, they may actually believe Orthodoxy. All right. And then they go to one of these seminaries, and then that's the end of them being a kind of default Orthodox. They transform and transmogrify into something else. Then once those priests are trained, that filters down into the local OCA or Greek Archdiocese congregations.
Yeah,
exactly. And it was like when I went to a Greek Archdiocese church, I remember remembering the sermons never once. Well, no, sorry. Once or twice I heard the word Christ. It was all social preaching, social teaching. It was about the ecumenical patriarch and how we have to respect the patriarch and the Greek festival. And it was just the most inane stuff possible. And you had this one former converted Pentecostal who was there. And, he still had a lot of crazy. And, someone said, why don't you give up your crazy Pentecostal stuff? He was trying to combine it with Orthodoxy charismatic stuff. And I said that was crazy. A lot of people said it too. And he said, well, the priest doesn't really believe in Christ, so why should I have to give up this? And no one really had an answer for him.
That was depressing.
And the priest, one time people asked the priest, do we believe in the real presence? And he says, it's not really important we talk about those things.
Like,
and you
really?
Yeah, and we tried to.
This is the sort of thing that I would think that people would have reports in the street.
When a few of us tried to say stuff to the Greek Archdiocese priest, like, are you trying to say this in a mystical sense, like give it a better, maybe we're misunderstanding? And he's like, this transubstantiation, consubstantiation, symbolism, none of that. That's not church. That's not part of the church's vocabulary. And we don't talk about that.
What's that guy's name?
I'm not going to say his name. He was a nice.
You really should say his name. He's a heretic, and he's literally destroying people's souls.
It was a Father Dionysius. I cannot remember his last name.
Look him up, people. Father Dionysius in North Carolina. Let's make him famous.
So there were a lot of people like that, and and he was a former Roman Catholic who's his parents had wanted him to be a Roman Catholic priest, and it was a whole. But there were a lot of people like. And then there was this other guy at the parish who was like an OCA reader, and he hated Saint Mark of Ephesus and was always attacking him. And it was like this. I thought this is a madhouse.
Was it an OCA church?
No, it was an OCA reader at a Greek Archdiocese church. It was the whole situation. I'm going. This is just anecdotal stories and things. But people have. There's not just me. I thought maybe this is just me, but it comes to be over the years. I've talked to more and more people, and people saw this.
Was it formation of the Theotokos Greek Orthodox Church in Greensboro?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, I think he left. That would be a Father Dionysius Listerman Vierling from 2005 to
all right. Let's not. He
left. He's gone. It's over. I don't know where he went.
The point is that this was a normative thing in a lot of these places.
I don't even know if he's Orthodox anymore.
And what happens in a lot of these places, was that, you know, people would come in on this. We saw this all the time, and they would come in late for communion, and that's, you know, 15 minutes, and they'd leave. And I know, like, this is a praxis question, but there's a doctrinal reason why this was happening.
Okay.
All right, because the doctrinal reason was that the clergy and the people essentially stopped believing in Orthodoxy. Even if they would say, yes, we're Orthodox, they didn't really believe in any of it. All right, I knew, and it was almost like you could have made the parish. You could essentially say it was a Novus Ordo Roman Catholic parish that called itself Orthodox and used the Eastern Divine Liturgy. That was the exact impression I got from it. All right, because I went to Novus Ordo parishes when I was looking to become a Roman Catholic, and I was like, this is the exact same stuff, you know. And I thought, this is going to be another fighting from within thing, and I'm not going through that all over again. So, I mean, not to get too much into it, but you know, Basil says, you know, John Beer doesn't believe in the historic resurrection. I believe it. He says an Origenist, and he teaches Origen is a great teacher. Well, that's an issue already. And of course, Origen would be too fundamentalist and conservative by John Beer's standards also. Let's get that straight. He's a Kantian postmodernist. Kantian postmodernist. Why is it always this kind of German idealism corrupts all these people?
What happens when people replace the fathers with vain philosophy?
With British empiricism or Kantian German idealism. Basil says he's no longer the dean now, but he hired most of the tenured professors.
Well, that's not good. That means we're going to have another generation of trash.
Yes, it's going to continue like that.
Not calling the seminarians trash, just
no. And even the so-called true Orthodox seminaries, like the one they have up in they tried to form from the Cuesta Synod of a combination of Etna.
Apart, though?
Pardon me?
Oh, you mean the one in California?
Yeah. Even that stuff, they're having all these people come there who were like speakers, and they were like, you know, there was one guy who was a speaker there. It was like a George Soros guy. And there was another, you know, and I asked somebody, I said, do they teach you have to believe the Old Testament is historically accurate and true? That is, you cannot say Adam and Eve. You cannot, you know, you have to believe in the flood and, you know, the Moses.
I'd be blown away if they said anything but sure.
Well, it was silence. That was the only answer I got.
Seriously?
Yes. So.
Wow, what an embarrassment.
And I think that is the problem with groups like, let me be frank, like a lot of these Etna-type people, because they have the same problem, even though they attack Hakna, the same attitude. See, we're getting involved in calling people, but this is true Orthodoxy versus false ecumenism. All right?
Yep.
So,
versus false extremism.
False extremism, okay? Well, and ecumenism.
We deal with ecumenism all the time.
The problem is this. I think a lot of now, of course, we're not associated with that true Orthodox type group. So, and in fact, in our own synod, we've made a big point in our different statements and confessions, which saying you have to believe that the scriptures are historically accurate.
Yeah.
That is the traditional Orthodox view. That is actually in clergy confessions. And Metron John has made a big point over the years of making people say they believe that. Because when he was a Roman Catholic in the 60s and going to Roman Catholic seminary, one of the points he brought out was that the so-called biblical criticism was the means through which they brought in modernism and liberalism into theological education. Because if you could deny the historicity of the Old Testament, it's only a matter of time before they attack the New Testament. And if you can undermine the historical teachings of the scriptures as historically accurate, the miracles, then guess what? The tradition doesn't hold up. Because what is the tradition about anyway? If the tradition is about guarding the canon of Scripture, what is it? What kind of canon is it guarding if it's a bunch of mythology?
Yep.
All right. This is why, people going to a lot of these seminaries, if they're teaching stuff like this, you don't go to them. And they're, like you said, they're heretical garbage.
One of the things that is unfortunate right now is that the educational setup that we have in America today, whether World Orthodoxy or True Orthodoxy, is woefully incomplete. It is, there's virtually, with the exception of Jordanville, there is virtually no class on apologetics at all throughout any educational institution for Orthodoxy in the country. There is no... and without apologetics, if you can't defend the faith, you have no right, in my opinion, to lead the church. You don't. If you can't defend your faith, that means you're not going to be able to teach others to do so. And if you can't teach others to do so, then there's no way to spread the faith.
Well, there's also like even at Jordanville, you have these influences like these Roquefort priests named Father Stephen Freeman, who I think may have been an old OCA priest,
Yeah.
who's basically bringing in biblical criticism and the attacks on the historicity of the Old Testament.
Oh, you've got to be kidding!
No. And now I will note, as much as I mentioned negative things about Jay Dyer actually did write a big essay that was very good against this Father Stephen Freeman. So I'll give him that. But I knew about this guy before, and a lot of other people did. And he writes for like this. Like the Ancient Faith Radio. I mean, it's the same types of people. Once you start getting involved in these Ancient Faith Radio type people, they start to get into all these World Orthodox jurisdictions. Thankfully, they can't really get into us because they don't want to, and we won't ever accept them. But that's basically spreading.
Well, I think but we still need to have some sort of.
And there's an educational reason. There's another reason. I hate to cut you off real quick.
Yeah.
Is if you want to be an accredited seminary, you theoretically have to have some sort of course modification that allows for mentioning the JEPD stuff. Right.
Right.
And you don't have you can teach it and then say why it's wrong, but a lot of them don't do that.
I'm not even saying that you need to get the credentialing of the world. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we do need to have some basis for education because we see what happens at the other end and ultimately ties into that false extremism thing. Where if there is not a basic education among the clergy as to whether, on how to defend the faith, on the basic principles of the faith, and on the dogmas of the faith, where you can be, and I hate to say this, but, it's these Craig Crawford types, these Archimandrite Nilos types that come out, these Gregories of Colorado, they come out and they point to one mistake you might make in a statement, and they try to take advantage of one's good nature to scare them into control.
Well, they're not scaring me.
Well, not you. I'm not talking about you, Father.
Right.
I'm talking about other people. Right. The point I'm trying to make is that.
Well, then they end up destroying. Then when they get, see, that's the other extreme. So when they get these people to join them, they end up destroying them.
Yeah.
And they don't care, and they never take responsibility. Like Gregory of Colorado, there are people who leave World Orthodoxy because of all the liberalism. They're joining Gregory of Colorado, and
they're not joining Gregory of Colorado.
Well, they used to if they don't know enough about him.
Yeah.
And it's like our Lord said in the Gospel that the Pharisees will go over land and sea to make one proselyte and make him twice as much a son of hell as you.
Yeah, no one will really do that.
And then they're simply, a lot of them will just leave Orthodoxy. I know one man who was baptized by Gregory of Colorado, and basically he almost completely left Orthodoxy after that because of what he experienced. And then eventually I think he joined the Roquefort or the OCA or something, and he kind of just gave up. And that's unfortunately what happens. So, people who are like normal true Orthodox people like us, we never get, that's never really, we're not really talked about, or, someone tries to say that seemingly, there's this idea that seemingly the most extreme and quote unquote radical position is the correct position. But that's not, why is that true?
I would say
it's like saying you have to do baptisms upon every single person, and if the priest mispronounced a syllable when he was saying one of the exorcism prayers, like he said exercise instead of extra, he said exorcise instead of exercise or something like that. Like I heard one Greek tell me one time that if when someone's being baptized, if you have long hair and one of your hairs is floating on the top of the water as you're going under, and it's not entirely wet all around, then the devil still gets in through that, and the baptism is invalid. Now, this is types of stuff that's not found in the canons and not found in the fathers. And there's this idea that if you do a 3-day fasting from meat and dairy, that somehow this makes you a holier person when you receive communion than if you just do the normal communion fast. But that's not found in the church. And when soon as people begin to add stuff like that, they turn into. I know there's too much.
But a lot of the reason that they're able to add stuff like that is because of a lack of basic education.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm saying. If we had a basic apologetical education for most people, they would be ready to handle the basic duties of clergy, and the rest would be handled by life.
And a lot of this goes back though before the whole ecumenism, modernism stuff. Because you look at 19th century Greece. They didn't really feel a need to have a lot of heavy apologetic teaching in rural Greece. The reason why is everybody was Orthodox. Nobody really thought about questioning the church, unless you had anti-clericals coming in from the outside. And the church really didn't. A lot of them didn't know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
All right. And the result is groups like the Communist Party formed in Greece. All right. And you had the Masons come into Greece. And everybody was kind of riding on the inertia of past Orthodox centuries. For example, look at Saint Cosmas of Aetolia. He had to preach throughout Greece and parts of what we call Albania. I think there were Albanians even in Greece. There was a lot of them, the Shqiptari, they was the Albanian name. And a lot of these people were not even baptized. They were such a terrible job that people just stopped having their kids baptized. And the Ottomans actually liked this because their view was that we'll come in later and make them Muslims.
Yeah.
And because Islam preyed upon the ignorance of people, by the way, that was how it made a lot of converts, not just by force.
Right. A lot of I hate to say it, but a lot of these extremist types kind of remind me of this.
Exactly. That was that whole specter haunting Greece. And there are a lot of great people in Greece, like Saint Cosmas. And Saint Cosmas basically was mainly responsible for I think someone said he's one of the reasons half of Greece didn't just become Muslim. Because there was a lot of problems in the church in that period. And so you had enough of these saints and teachers that were keeping everything from just going right off of the cliff, all right? But once you have the ecumenical patriarchate being taken over by the Masons, basic church instruction goes down continuously. And the same thing begins to, in fact, happen in Russia, too.
Yep.
And this period of bad instruction or no instruction or trying to somehow rely upon the folk tradition to teach people orthodoxy, which unfortunately is not always a very reliable way of just people talk about the grandmothers preserving orthodoxy, and that's true. Grandmothers, a lot of them were pious people.
That's family, not folk.
Exactly. But an old grandmother may not be able to defend her faith in a coherent way against atheist attacks. She may not apostatize, but she may not have many answers for her grandchildren.
Yep.
All right. And there are people like the OCA and like Etna people who will say you should not even have apologetics. It's just almost as fideistic. We believe, and that's just enough.
You know what the ultimate. You can always tell what side a person is on when it comes to apologetics when they use the word polemic. If a person refers to apologetics as polemic, even though apologetics is about the defense of the faith, then polemic means you're not supposed to defend the faith.
Yeah, why aren't you supposed to defend orthodoxy and attack heresy?
And so if you're not supposed to defend the faith, then clearly the faith is of little value. And that is whenever somebody says, well, you're very into polemics and I'm not into that, I'm like, well, you're not very into orthodoxy. Because I'm not into polemics, I'm into defending the truth.
Was it St. Basil the Great who said, rather an honorable war than a dishonorable peace?
Yeah.
He said he wages war against heresy.
I've heard it so many times back and forth in different places that I don't even know if it's St. Basil anymore.
Exactly. But St. Basil talks about how he wages... St. Orosius of Braga, and his works against the Pelagians, basically says, I detest the heresy, but I detest the heresy because I love the heretic. Because I want his soul to be saved. If I didn't care about him, I wouldn't be so concerned about writing these books. I mean, why would so many of the fathers and saints and regular Orthodox clergy and laity who are into defending the faith over 2,000 years spend so much time defending the faith if apparently they had no love? And this is the false equating of true love, charity, with this emotional 19th century lovey-dovey type feeling. All right. For example, remember St. Maximus.
It's really usually just disguised lust and greed.
Exactly, and St. Matt, and or not wanting to be offensive. But our Lord was very explicit in the Gospels. Houses will be divided because of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He says, I do not come to bring peace upon the world, into the world. What did he come? He says he's going to bring a division. All right. Not that he wants to do this, but it's going to be as a matter of the fact, the truth. It says in John 3, and I'm quoting from memory, that the light came. All right. And people did not want to know the light because it showed their deeds of darkness. All right. So a lot of people prefer to operate in the shadows. And Basil makes the point. He says something. Let me see if we have any more questions. Basil says he was baptized by pouring, though. He's at an Orthodox church, so he's seeking a corrective baptism. That's technically what was being done at a lot of these Ephraimite monasteries in the Ecumenical Patriarchate, where they have like some lay monk take the person out back who was baptized in the Presbyterians and do a triple immersion baptism, because you can't really depose a lay monk. All right. And then they can say, well, now we feel comfortable doing a chrismation. All right. Because he has the correct form. And I think someone even told me that when I was trying to, before I became true Orthodox, they were like, well, I'll do a triple immersion baptism of you in my pool, and then at least I can calm your conscience. But okay, but let's get back to some of the questions.
Well, actually, no. It's 2 minutes to 10, Father. And we always generally try to answer all the questions, and then we run out of questions, and then we get confused on the questions. We have a lot more questions here that we can deal with.
We have one more. I think we have enough time to answer one more question, though.
Okay, one more question.
Okay, Basil says, why do papists receive fake communion through one species and not both? How early is this practice? That's like 13th, 14th century.
Yeah, it's pretty late.
I think probably the 1200s is when you're starting to see that. I mean, some people may say 1100s, but I think it's really the 1200s, and that caused so much of a eventually a confusion and opposition. You had the Hussites, the Utraquists. The Utraquists were not necessarily the same as the Hussites in the Roman Catholic Church. Utraquists were just clergy who demanded to have communion of both kinds. Why? The reason they said that you only had to receive communion in bread, the bread form. The reason the papists said that was that they reasoned correctly that within each particle is the whole Christ, body, blood, and soul of divinity. Confession of Dositheus says that.
I gotta answer this thing because 13th, 14th century. That's great, Basil. Ox Templar asks, I don't have any GOC around my area, but with the GOC accept my baptism and my previous confessions of it if it was truly triple immersion and Trinitarian? I don't know who USMCP, but he said yes, GOC even accept prior Protestant baptism. I don't know what GOC you're part of, USMCP, but I'm pretty sure most of us don't accept Protestant baptisms unless they're pretty much identical to the Orthodox, which they never are. Yes.
Unless they're triple immersion baptism, they Trinity.
Here's the better question, Ox. I hate to say this, but whenever somebody says, I don't have any GOC around my area, I have to ask, where on earth are you? Because if you are in any part of the developed world, most likely you have a GOC church around you. Take a guess, throw the country out, and I'll tell you whether you have 1 or 10 GOCs around you. But most of the time when people say I don't have a GOC around my area, they mean I don't have a GOC around the corner. And unfortunately, if the faith is serious, then you have to try. Louisville, Kentucky. I'm pretty sure there are true Orthodox in Kentucky, but in any case, hold on 1 second.
But let me finish answering the question of Basil's.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So the papists said, well, because the whole Christ is in each particle of the bread and wine, of the bread, and that is accurate abstractly. Because that's true, they said you only technically need to receive the bread and you don't need to receive the species of wine. So this is one of those classic scholastic type arguments about what is the absolute minimum you have to do. It's, for example, why did the Roman Papist Church eventually make triple fusion pouring baptism the normative thing? Well, they made it the normative thing because the scholastics and others simply said, well, technically on the deathbed, you only have, or when someone's extremely sick, or in the desert or something like that, and if in an emergency situation, you only have to pour water on their heads 3 times, because you can find that didicate. Ignoring the fact that these were in extremis conditions. And so the scholastics and the later papists who followed them reasoned that, well, if that's all you have to do, maybe that's all you need to do. So that's the reason.
Okay. Well, in taking a look here, okay, Kentucky, basically, I'm aware of TOC people in Ohio and Indiana. Kentucky directly, I'm not sure if there's anything specifically in Kentucky, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of people would be willing to help you if you want to go that route. Don't cheapen it by saying, well, if I just go to this church, will it get accepted?
This USMPCP person says, not trying to spread disinfo, but local GOC parish will not be named, told me so. Now, when you say GOC...
we've been naming, no offense, we've been naming people all day long. So, yeah, name them.
Yes. When you say GOC, do you mean Greek Orthodox Church or genuine Orthodox Church? Because a lot of people...
We mean genuine Orthodox.
Because I've seen a lot of these Greek archdiocese churches now calling themselves GOC, by the way. I've actually seen that.
And so, I want this disinfo guy because I'd like him to. If you mean genuine Orthodox, tell us who it is.
Yes, who is the priest that told you they accept Protestant baptism? What's the name of the church?
Because we're talking about genuine Orthodox, not, the GOA. We can wait.
Yeah, I'll wait. Who was the person that said this?
Totally. Because we'd love to know if there's GOC people who are literally not following the proper.
If there were genuine Orthodox Christians,
we want to make them famous.
If there are true Orthodox Church, true Orthodox Christians saying that we accept Protestant baptisms, then we want to know, because it's his Greek Orthodox Church. Do you still want me to name the parish? Yeah. See, here's the problem.
You're talking about the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. Yes, most of them accept Protestant baptism.
We're talking about what would be called the Greek Orthodox Old Calendar or True Orthodox.
Right, we're talking about the Old Calendar as the genuine Orthodox. The GOA unfortunately does follow the SCOBA guidelines, which say that like the Methodists and like 16 other Protestant groups are.
The Ecumenical Patriarchate document from the 1920s says even the liberal Catholics, the Theosophists, can have their baptisms accepted.
I didn't know that. That's actually.
Yes. I mean, it's actually ridiculous. And when you confront these people, see, this is why I think we should really say True Orthodox Church, TOC. I don't like saying GOC.
Well, I hate using the term GOC. I prefer TOC, but people started bringing back GOC because I guess they thought genuine sounds better. Or, now that I think about it, maybe it was just because it sounded that people would confuse with Greek. Maybe they were just trying to make themselves bigger. Yeah, we should just start using TOC again, which is much better.
But I've seen like a few Greek archdiocese churches that are now saying, St. Mark's GOC Church.
I'm going to ask. Okay, Ox, I don't know your life story. Obviously, you're talking about baptism and becoming a monastic. If you want to be baptized in the True Orthodox Church, my suggestion to you is if you know how to reach Ira Monk Enoch on Facebook, or you know how to reach us in one of the various channels that we have, but on Facebook, if you go to the Orthodox Apologetics War Zone,
I think you can send a message to someone who on a Facebook.
If you're seriously that concerned, there are bishops, there are priests, there are clergy who will help you.
Yes,
and you're not like off it. It's not like we're dealing with somebody in like the furthest corners of like Fiji or something.
Yeah, I mean, we just baptized hundreds of people in the Philippines.
I think
so we'll find ways to get people baptized. We will do that.
No. You're not stepping on any toes, USMCP, but you have to know what we're talking about before you make the shot. So we're not.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
Yeah, no problem. And we have been naming names, so we were kind of really just looking forward to that.
Yeah, because we've tried to avoid for years doing that.
Right, we've always been the nice guys who are like, we can't mention names, and everyone's like, oh, well, this guy and this guy. You know what? We're gonna call you all out. We're calling out all the fakes. We're calling out all the people who are like, we are really the true Orthodox with fake accent. We go Orthodox. No, you're gonna.
Father Pantaleimon, who pretended he was some Greek.
Pantaleimon with a fake accent. Father Pantaleimon of Hockna, who was famous for that big fake accent. He came from Detroit. He was born in Detroit with a fake accent. He talked with a fake Greek accent, even though he was born and raised in Detroit, and was Phi Beta Kappa. It was Father Anthony Gavalis, God rest his soul, who told me that. My mind was blown. You thought he came off the boat from Greece. It was a lie. The whole thing was a sales pitch. And I've seen sales pitches like that all over, and we've got to blow them up because, in all honesty, we have to, I hate to say it, but defending the faith also means defending from charlatans. Yep. All right. Well, if you're genuinely afraid of that, Ox, we will help you. Contact Father Enoch with your real name. I don't know. Do you have anything else we want to discuss? Because it's already past.
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything, and we've, we addressed the theme of true orthodoxy versus false extremism. Which I think is just as important as addressing true orthodoxy versus the ecumenism and modernism of world orthodoxy.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'll even say there's a connection between these two groups, because both the ecumenists, modernists, and the so-called false extremists, like some of the Matthewites, not all of them, but some of them, and some of the other Floronites, other old calendarists. Because there are, obviously there are some of them, most of them aren't crazy, but there are a lot of these smaller groups in which they will basically both agree that the West, for example, was never really Orthodox. It never really had the same dogma as the East. Now, the false extremists will claim it from the Hockton perspective of the West was really never Orthodox. And the renovationists from the left, the ecumenist modernists, will claim it from an ecumenical perspective of, well, all dogmas are acceptable. But they essentially all cohere to the same view that the church was not one during the first millennium, that if the church in the East was the true church, it was apparently in communion with heretics for hundreds of years, not knowing it. All right.
And I'm gonna just to answer, because apparently I don't want USMCP to be offended. Father, are you that critical of Greeks as opposed to yourselves? We're critical of heresy.
Yes, I'm not. I know.
And Father Pantaleimon, as much as I'm talking about his Greek accent, was born in Detroit and was part of the National Honor Council for Students. He was, in other words, not a Greek immigrant, but when I spoke to him, he pretended like a guy. He literally was like, "Hello, Joseph. Yes, I am Father Pantaleimon." Like literally, like the guy like learned his English out of like a Berlitz text. It was a lie.
Well, I should know. I've been to Greece. I've known people over in Greece, and a lot of people.
I've met Greeks who spoke better English.
Exactly.
Greek.
So I'm not critical of the ethnic group of the Greeks. You're mistaking me. In America, when we say the Greek Archdiocese, that's all we can really say. I guess we could call it the Ecumenical Patriarchate Archdiocese or whatever.
We should start calling it that so it doesn't confuse people.
The Fanar Church in America, I suppose. But no, I'm critical of heretical Greeks, just as I'm critical of a heretical, Russians or heretical English people or heretical Irish
Roman
or heretical
Catholics or exactly. We're critical of heretical Westerners all day long.
Correctly, if you're not teaching the faith correctly, not just because you're ignorant, but because you're maliciously ignorant, and that's another issue of malicious evil. I know that's an oxymoron. Then we're going to be critical of that.
Yeah.
So
we're calling you out.
But again, Greeks are great people. Most Greeks, most Greek true Orthodox are not. I don't think
true Orthodox are awesome, mostly, except for some of the a few of the bishops, but most of them are pretty good.
Yes. So because they're just regular people who want to follow the faith.
Yeah.
And in the case of the case of the United States,
and we've seen it in the Philippines. Father, you saw it personally in the Philippines. When you just meet people like that, no matter where they're from, if their interest is the faith, it usually works out pretty good.
Well, he says they're a bit. GOA is heterodox in your view. Yes. Are they a bit liberal in politics? They're a bit liberal and modernist in their theology.
Well, I think he means a bit Democrat in politics because the archons are always donating to Democratic campaigns.
Yeah, and I think, and that's a whole other issue, a program of one of the reasons you have a lot of these people go into that, unfortunately, as the Democratic Party became much more into feminism, abortion rights, attacking traditional everything, that people felt they went along, who were Democrats and they were members of Greek Archdiocese, they began to change their theology to go along with their political. Now, I've known a lot of Democrats who, basically are Democrats in name only, and they never, in fact, vote for a Democrat candidate, or they don't vote at all. But that's just a sad political reality. But you have the same. You can have similar things going among the Republicans and such.
Right.
But,
now, as for the heterodoxy, the GOA is heavily ensconced in ecumenism. I still remember, I forget whether it was Bishop Alexios or Metropolitan Maximus who gave an award to John Dominic Crossan of the Jesus Seminar, who believed that the Lord was eaten by wild dogs, and that's why they couldn't find his body.
The Ecumenical Patriarch commemorates the Pope.
And we were talking about the priests that we named earlier from the GOA parish in North Carolina, who basically didn't believe communion was real. These things are basic teachings of the Orthodox Church. So yes, if the clergy, up to the priests and up to the bishops, are teaching other than that, then the canons teach us that we're supposed to break from them. We're supposed to go find a bishop who teaches Orthodoxy. Yes. That is literally and that's why some people have referred to the Holy Canons as toilet paper, because of the fact that they don't like the reality that the canons allow the laity to leave and go find real bishops. So instead of going to worry about which one's canonical, the whole name canonical is a joke, because in order to be canonical, you have to follow the canons. And so if you're insulting the canons, you're not canonical in any way, shape, or form. So this whole conference
you claim to join a true Orthodox church, and the so-called true Orthodox bishop says St. Augustine is not a saint. If he attacks, if he attacks the Telonia, if he does these modernist,
these are things that are within the councils of the church. If someone says St. Augustine, who was blessed by an ecumenical council, is not a saint, he's a heretic too. Get away from him.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if he calls himself true Orthodox or not.
So watch out. Just because you're avoiding the GOA doesn't mean, I'm going to follow Gregory of Colorado. Well, guess if you do that, there's all sorts of heresies you're going to be following too. I hate to say it, but when it comes right down to it, following true Orthodoxy to some degree means following the canons of the church, the teachings of the church, and the wisdom of crowds. Avoid the crazies.
Yep. Okay, I think
I think we're good now. Yeah,
and I think we're going to continue doing programs, even though a lot of people want us to shut down and not do programs.
Yeah, we're just going to keep. We're just going to keep on going. So
we're going to do even more programs, an hour a night program.
We're just shout out to Craig because he's inspired us to do even more.
Do you know the story of what happened with Pope Saint Gregory II in the 720s, or Saint Gregory III in the 730s, when the representatives of the Byzantine Emperor came to him and they said, all these icons on St. Peter's have to be taken down on our next our next visit, and they were very explicit about it. And Pope St. Gregory III said, "Well, you have a surprise. Don't worry. We'll make an impression on you next time you visit." So after the ambassadors of the Byzantine Emperor left, St. Gregory met with all the artisans and iconographers and said, "I want icons on the chancel screen. I want a rood screen erected with icons. I want icons everywhere where they're not." All right. And he said, "I want a whole chapel built with new icons." So they came back, and it was like, "How do you like it now?" And they were really upset, obviously, know. But his answer wasn't to be like, maybe I should not say anything. Maybe we should back
down a little bit.
Yeah, his view was that go full hog and build even more churches. In fact, the reason the Feast of All Saints, this is not talked about, the reason the Feast of All Saints was placed where it was because it coincides with the dedication of a large church attached to St. Peter's called the Chapel of All Saints, which on November 1st on the church calendar, where they held a council that officially and solemnly anathematized iconoclasm in like 730 or 731 at the Chapel of All Saints on November 1st. And they had iconographic representations of all the saints. And this was like, so a little bit of Western Rite history there. The reason All Saints, when it was recent so big, it's in fact was originally designed as it became an anti-iconoclast festival in Rome in 731.
Well, that's good to know. We should bring that back.
Exactly. I mean, we already celebrate, but that was why.
Really do like a big procession with icons.
Yeah, exactly. But that was according in the Roman tradition in Rome. That was their basically what we call triumph of Orthodoxy. All right.
Right.
And when they told Gregory II and Gregory at one point, the Byzantine Emperor told Gregory II in the 720s, "Look, I'm going to arrest you," and he said, "Look, you can try, but I'm going to be hiding out in the hills. You're never going to find me." And a lot of these people like Romanians like this shows the disrespect he was having for the emperor of the Christian people. He was a heretic, but but the Orthodox bishops should respect him still. This was but if the emperor is a heretic, it doesn't matter who's a heretic, whether it's a guy claiming to be a bishop, a guy claiming to be an emperor. You don't just sit back and let him do whatever he wants to do, because that's how churches fall into apostasy, and that's how other churches have to separate from them.
Well, this is a guy claiming to be a guy on the internet, so we're going to double down on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a guy claiming to be an internet, but this opens up an avenue for a wider discussion of this type of stuff, because it's going on, and we've not addressed it in a direct fashion.
Well, let's address that on the next show because it's 10:16. All right, Father.
Okay. Oh, by the way, did you know the Ecumenical Patriarchate has suppressed its Paris ex-Russian archdioceses in the West?
I had no idea.
The Paris Exarchate under the family.
I know what it is. I just had no idea that
they suppressed all that, so they're not going to be calling it Russian anymore.
Oh, interesting.
So, and they're going to they're preparing for this unification council this month. Whatever.
As more of the stuff gets worse, we'll be here to document it and point out where it doesn't fit the canons.
Yes, and the point is that the canons point to the faith. All right, so it's the faith. All right, okay. All right, Father Joseph. I guess
we'll get back on Thursday with Orthodoxy versus Everyone. I think this is going to be the last week we do 2 shows, and we'll probably switch to doing 4.
1 hour shows a night, right?
Yep. Probably Monday, Tuesday. What? Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or
yeah. Well, that gives us more opportunity for pontification.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. Absolutely, and just remember, cats still can't be baptized.
Exactly.
And so
cats do not have immortal souls; they have animal souls.
Right? They're not as good as human souls. Definitely not human souls. All right. Well, have a great night, everyone. Father, benedicite.
Benedicite. Okay. Closing the program now.